Do you think that AGOA needs to be reinvented, and do you think that African countries have in fact benefited from this scheme?
Actually, AGOA needs to not only to be reinvented, but reanalyzed in terms of whether it benefits Africans more or benefits American more. Why I'm saying that, if you compare the trading partners in Africa, you notice that United States of America has always been the biggest importer of material from the continent. And when we had China having a surge, Africa was able to record an average of 5% economic growth, 2005 to 2008. But with AGOA in place for the last 8 years, what we are not seeing is that it's America which is reaping more benefits than the African countries that are members.
Just looking at the product diversification, it has been relooked. It was relooked in 2004, increasing its product to about 7,000 products. Do you think that this also needs to be relooked? We have quite a lot of competition coming through from China concerning our textiles and apparels, and it seems that those sectors are the key focus right now.
Actually, one has to look at the trade volumes, especially on what Africa would say it exports to United States of America. For example, last year, United States recorded imports of amounting to $86 billion from Africa. Of that, 80% was actually crude oil. So only 20% was the window that was taking the diversified products that we are talking about. And then if one was to analyze who actually drills the oil that America imports, you'll get that it's still American companies that get oil from the soil of Africa back to United States of America. So I think the issue is not just diversification, but it's a matter of Africans asking themselves, have they also analyzed their interest in this AGOA pact? Because I think America is actually very clear in terms of its interest with AGOA. And I think the apparels and other imports that Africans have been allowed to take to the United States of America could just be what I may call a pill that excites the African governments, while they actually lose a lot in terms of the raw materials they export to United States of America.
James, would you say that America is taking advantage of this AGOA pact, or do you think that it's a matter of Africa relooking its regulations?
Actually, I think here we cannot blame the United States of America, because even if you check on the AGOA website, they are very clear in terms of what America wants from the AGOA pact. But what is not clear, you don't see the African voice in terms of what the African interest is in AGOA or what the individual country interests are. And unless Africa develops their own interests, it's going to be extremely difficult even for America to have a valuable discussion. So I think the challenge is more on the African side to relook at the negotiation they have had with the United States of America, and where possible maybe domesticate the eligibility criteria. Because if you look at some of the points, America insists that a country has to have rule of law, a country has to have political pluralism, a country has to have market economics, if I just mention a few. If we domesticated that, I think AGOA then will translate into benefits for Africa. But the way it is, if you look across in terms of the political atmosphere and the 38 plus members that are eligible, we are far from reaching political pluralism. We are far from even realizing rule of law. And I think America could be taking advantage of that to still take what they can take while things are still messy on the continent.
Jean-Francois, what do you make of AGOA, and do you think that it needs to be relooked from here? I mean, as James said, that Africa needs to take things into its own hands.
Well, yes, basically, if you have a trade agreement, which because it has not been perhaps thought properly or its consequences analyzed properly on one side, and it ends up benefiting one side, which is not the developing country, then obviously it needs probably to be relooked at, because the idea of these trade agreements is that they, especially these preferential trade regimes, is that they can help early starters in the market, countries which are new entrants in the market, to gain sufficient experience, sufficient productivity, critical mass to be able to compete with already strong established countries. I mean, the idea of these trade pacts should be to enable African countries over time to compete with the likes of Asia, with the likes of Latin America, with the bigger players in the market. And sometimes it is not just an issue of the exchange rate or the relative labor cost, but of the quality of infrastructure, of the logistics cost. There are many ways in which through better policies Africa can become more competitive.
Jean-Francois, we know that trade volumes are relatively low globally. Is it going to be difficult for African countries to secure a piece of the pie rather than just looking at the crude exports? We know that that is relatively secure, but looking at the other sectors, which we need to diversify.
Well, a large problem of Africa historically is that it exports raw materials, that it imports finished commodities. So the value-added content of the exports, the profits that it can generate are still relatively low. Now, of course, at present, exports have fallen globally, in part because of the global recession, in part also because of the financial crisis, which made trade finance less available. As the economy recovers and the financial system heals and financial markets normalize, you are likely to see some recovery in volumes. But look at what we were saying earlier on. What is rising? Resource stocks, because people still think of Africa in terms of resources. And one way towards development is if we increase the value-added content of exports, then we generate more export proceeds, which can then be channeled into investment, and then again increase the productivity and quality performance. So at the end of the day, there is no alternative but to try and diversify and deepen the spectrum of our African exports, including South African exports.
James, 9 out of the 39 countries that AGOA is involved with are really benefiting from this pact. It seems that the other 30 are under severe pressure, not really taking full advantage of the trade benefits that AGOA could offer. Do you think that it's issues like logistical problems, infrastructure problems, or do you think that it's a lack of knowledge?
Well, I think first it points at what my colleague has just talked about, that one side knew what it wanted in this trade pact, but the other side, that's on the African side, they didn't take time to analyze what it is that they were getting into. And that's why we are faced with a situation where we are talking about trade volumes, but then when we look at who is pushing those trade volumes, they are not even the African people themselves. What many African countries would be talking about is they have offered jobs or employment numbers. But then when you look at the types of jobs the African people have been exposed to, they are not the types of jobs that can expose them to develop their knowledge levels so as to engage in value-added tasks. So I think I would say as of now, really we have very little to celebrate about the AGOA initiative.
Zimbabwe, a country that has come into topic of conversation about joining AGOA, and many say that stats show that despite facing tariff barriers, Zimbabwe currently beats 35 of the 39 eligible countries. Well,
from where we are looking at the AGOA initiative at the moment, I think it will be even rushing too fast to say maybe Zimbabwe should be joining AGOA. What we should be talking about is how do we rethink the whole idea of AGOA so that it can also start benefiting Africa and African people. So before Zimbabwe joined something that is already being thought to be not okay, I think it will not be healthy for anybody to be pushing Zimbabwe to join AGOA. I think the best should be how do we change the way things are, because we have to know that now the global market sphere is growing bigger. People are now even looking east, and therefore AGOA cannot operate under the same paradigm that when it was set up. So there are several things that have to be changed.